Good morning. Thanks for joining us for our webinar today. This is our first webinar of 2018, and we're all really excited to be here with you today. We're going to be talking about several financing tools, which often can be good fits, or at least worth considering when your community has a development project on your hands. So we have a great panel assembled today. I'm joined by Juan Torres, who is the Finance Development Team Director, and Crystal Clearwater, the Finance Development Team Specialist, and that's with the New Mexico Economic Development Department, as well as Juan. And then we're joined by Jamie Jaramillo, who's a planner with Consensus Planning, which are located in Albuquerque, but work statewide. And then myself, I'm Joanna Nelson, and I'm also on the New Mexico Economic Development Finance Development team. So before we get started, I wanted to point out that we will be sending the presentation out to everybody that registered, and we are recording this as well. It'll be available on our New Mexico Economic Development Finance Team webpage, and we also have a YouTube channel, so we'll make those available. And we will take questions at the end, so as we go along, feel free to type in your questions as we go. There should be a bottom, or to the bottom right of your screen. Just feel free to type questions and we'll get to those. And if for some reason we're not able to this session, we will definitely follow up with you. So let's see. We are going to take about an hour and attempt to cover all of this material. I think it's pretty courageous of us because these topics in their own respect are pretty complex and open-ended, but the point of today hopefully is to make sure that you are aware of these tools and have some inkling of how to use them and where to go for further information. So we don't have time to go in depth on each one of these topics, but hopefully you'll get a 50,000-foot view and leave time for questions at the end. So Crystal, before we get started, is going to go over briefly what we do on the Finance Development team.
I'm Crystal Clearwater of the Finance Development team here at the NMEDD, and our goal here is to create and retain jobs in New Mexico. We utilize a lot of tools to help businesses expand, relocate, start up, and prevent shutdown. And we do that by providing in-depth consultations for businesses and startup companies. We can provide analyses of financial statements, collaborate to find solutions with resource partners like the Manufacturing Extension Partnership and the New Mexico Small Business Development Center, as well as federal and state agencies. We can help find funding through federal and state programs offered by the USDA, NMFA, SBA, and others. Develop financial combinations that may include debt or equity financing and access to various lending institutions and programs, and perform incentive and tax credit analyses to identify cost savings opportunities. Please. Are the Local Economic Development Act program, which allows us to assist businesses who either manufacture or are economic-based companies. This is a gap-filling program that helps companies relocate to or expand in New Mexico by reimbursing a portion of the costs incurred, land or infrastructure. Collaboration occurs between the state and local governing body to get that lead of funding to the company. We have the Rural Efficient Business Program, which helps small business owners learn if their operation is energy, financially, and workforce efficient. The program promotes cost savings through on-site energy assessments provided by the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department here at the state. And our team can provide a financial tune-up as well as facilitate solutions to workforce challenges. The Credit Enhancement Program provides a gap-filling solution to companies that want to use a loan to make a business-related purchase, fund startup costs, obtain working capital, franchise fees, and other stuff. The program helps by providing up to 50% of the collateral needed to support the loan. The amount of the collateral support available is determined by various factors like whether the business is in a rural area, if it is minority or veteran owned, and so on. We're offering this program in partnership with local banks and lending institutions, and this program is often less restrictive than others. We are actively searching for projects, folks, so please do contact us. We're conducting this webinar today as part of the New Mexico FUNDIT program, which is managed by Joanna Nelson. She'll be touching more on FUNDIT later. The New Markets Tax Credit Program is something we support in collaboration with the New Mexico Finance Authority, or NMFA. Juan Torres will be providing more information on that. The EB-5 Foreign Investor Program allows eligible entrepreneurs to apply for a green card if they create or preserve 10 full-time qualified jobs in the U.S. and make a substantial capital investment into a commercial enterprise within the U.S. As the name implies, we work with an EB-5 regional center designated by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services to facilitate this program. With that, I'll hand it back over to Joanna to talk about FUNDIT.
Great, thanks, Crystal. This webinar actually is a part of FUNDIT, our FUNDIT educational webinar series. So we'd be remiss if we didn't share with you what FUNDIT was. Hopefully most of you know what FUNDIT is, but just touch on it briefly. This is a part of a webinar series that we'll have 5 more this year, and we cover a variety of topics, educational in nature. You know, we review different funding programs, different economic development concepts, all with the mission of providing information and knowledge to communities that have questions and challenges about funding their economic development and infrastructure projects. So FUNDIT is an informal group made up of funders, and these are the big funders that exist in our state that have funds available for economic development and infrastructure projects. These are state and federal players. We get together quarterly and we have meetings where we hear presentations from communities that essentially it's almost like a Shark Tank where they pitch their projects and they have questions, they have a gap in financing, they're looking for guidance, and they are able to receive feedback and brainstorming, connections, all sorts of valuable tidbits that they're able to gain from meeting with the funders to help, you know, get them on the way. So the application process is very simple. It's online. It's on our FUNDIT webpage, which is through the New Mexico Economic Development webpage. And as you can see, these are all the partners that we have. The application is very simple. We see a variety of projects, but they all are either economic development in nature or dealing with infrastructure. And one more thing, we actually created what we call a funding resource map. So the idea behind this is we're pretty excited about it, but relating to the mission of FUNDIT, of providing help and assistance to communities on financing challenges, we wanted to create a map that would help them better navigate the funding sources. So you can go to this website up top called RESTAprograms.com, go to /FUNDIT, and it'll actually pull up this engaging map that you can find funding sources broken down by category. So let's say you have a development project downtown, and it has numerous components like transportation, water, cultural, business development. So you can actually search through the map and find loans and grants and other financing opportunities. So we're really excited about that. And keep in mind, if you do go to the site and reference this, this is version 1.0. We're hoping to make this even better. So, and actually Jamie, who's on the panel, was instrumental in helping us create this as well. So we're really excited about that. So getting into the idea of public sector development tools and practices. As we all know, it's easy to be overwhelmed with all the different types of funding mechanisms that are out there when you have a community development project. So as a community, if you have gone through the planning process, you've determined the feasibility, your project makes sense. Obviously, that big hurdle, that next question is how do you pay for this? So it's good to have an understanding and a broad idea of what the different tools are and where they fit together, because obviously as a community, you have to weigh the inputs and the outputs to make sure that the cost of your financing is making sense in the long run. So I thought this was a good list to show what are the most costly financing tools that are out there for communities when they are considering development projects, and what are the least costly. So as you can see, grants being the most costly all the way down to bond financing being the least costly. Jumping into bonds, the discussion of bond financing, obviously most of us are familiar with the concept of bonds. We hear a lot about them in our respective communities and our state, especially around the time of election season. Along with that hearing about it in daily life comes a lot of either negative or positive connotation. There's a lot of perception that bonds are very difficult and complex to administer. So it's important that communities arm themselves with knowledge and insight into the benefits and advantages, as well as the disadvantages of bond financing. Because the reality is that these are a really useful tool for communities to use, especially for projects which involve substantial investment but lack the financial resource. One of the advantages, and we obviously see this a lot in our department, and especially in FUNDIT, and I'm sure Jamie can say the same, is that very few communities in New Mexico rarely have the cash on hand to cover their large-scale projects. So that's one of the advantages of bonds, is that they can spread the cost of a project over its expected lifetime. So as a community considers taking on public debt, it provides a scenario where they can build now and repay with future income. So when we talk about bonds, there are two types. There are public use and private activity. So going into the public use bonds, these are the ones that we hear oftentimes described as government or municipal bonds. These are issued by states, cities, counties, redevelopment agencies, public utility districts, and basically any entity with taxation power, power of eminent domain, and policing power. So they're used for a variety of uses and projects, but the idea is that the projects are intended to address essential government functions. So these are projects that will, no doubt, and there's a test that actually the projects have to go through, but no doubt that the project will serve a public good. And the two different distinguishers of public use bonds are general obligation bonds and revenue bonds. So GO bonds are basically projects that have no revenue stream attached to them. So this would be an example of let's say a sewer facility or a bridge, something that is not actually generating income. So the community has to pledge GRT revenue or a property tax revenue in order to assure repayment of the bond. Revenue bonds, obviously, are the opposite of that. Those are bonds that are backed by a specific revenue stream by the project. So you're actually looking at projects that are generating income, like a parking garage or a toll road. So it's interesting to look at public use bonds because there's a number of different activities that are considered qualified activities that we've mentioned, like being available for nonprofit development and several other instances. So do you have anything to add, Juan, about public use bonds?
Yeah, real quickly, I think just to kind of example. So general obligation bond examples in Santa Fe, the rail yard, they use general obligation bonds. They actually used a combination, but general obligation bonds to redevelop the rail yard. Also, general obligation bonds were used to purchase the Santa Fe University of Art and Design, which is currently being evaluated. So if anybody has any ideas on reuse for that facility, I think the city of Santa Fe is actively soliciting input, and we're more than happy to send that link to people. Some of the revenue bonds examples that I think are pertinent, again, Santa Fe, Thornburg companies built a campus just off of 599, and that was done through an industrial revenue bond with the city of Santa Fe. And Joanna mentioned nonprofit or educational institutions. So there's a provision for providing tax-free bonds to educational institutions. And the city of Santa Fe did that, has done that in the past for St. John's College. And that allows those institutions to be able to offer those tax-free bonds to their investors, and that helps lower their costs. So lots of good examples of general obligation and revenue bonds out there, and we're more than happy to engage if there's any specific questions on those. Thank you.
Great. And it is important to note that the New Mexico Finance Authority is the issuer of public bonds in the state, and we'll provide the contact for them as well. The next type of bond is the private activity bond. So these are a popular topic when you are discussing basically the community's ability to be competitive in economic development by attracting companies, by helping existing companies expand, and essentially creating jobs and beneficial economic impact, because the local government is able to basically subsidize the debt for the private entity. And these bonds, although they are providing economic beneficial impact to the community, the real benefit is going to the company and incentivizing them to create their project in the local community. So you have two, and I should point out that these oftentimes you hear the word these are known as pass-through or conduit bonds, because the obligation to repay the principal and interest rates rests with the private entity involved, not the public entity that actually issues the bonds. So and these are essentially private transactions through the public entity. But there are two different definers under private activity bonds. And the first one is industrial revenue bonds, IRBs, that you hear a lot about. And we have listed the different qualified activities under IRBs. There's a number of qualified activities. The main thing to look at is that the community obviously has to constantly gauge the public benefit of engaging in some of these projects. And these are all regulated by the IRS. And then IDBs, industrial development bonds, are a type of IRB, but these are specific to manufacturing and processing facilities. And there are particular limitations to IDBs. For example, capital cost can't be more than $10 million. The project has to have public benefit. And the private activity bonds, I see the private activity bonds, these are going through the New Mexico Department of Finance and Administration's Board of Finance. And actually, the Board of Finance is involved in a lot of the rules and the guidelines of the tools that we're talking about. So Juan's going to go into more depth on the Board of Finance. But do you have anything to add, Juan?
Just that there is a type of industrial revenue bond that's colloquially known as the IRB Light, and it's a personal equipment, personal property only. So it doesn't deal with real estate, and it's a kind of streamlined IRB that could be done really easily and quickly, that is limited to just the kind of exempting the personal property associated with the project. So if you have a project with a lot of equipment, you might be well consider an IRB Light. It's faster and cheaper than a full-blown industrial revenue bond. So that's just a piece of information there.
Okay, great. And then we're going to turn it over to Jamie, who is with Consensus Planning. And she's going to share her insight and experiences in the private sector. And you should have control of the presentation, Jamie.
Good morning, everyone. Joanna, I don't see the controls down below.
Okay, why don't you try clicking it and it might show. Okay, see the little arrow? Yep. There's a little arrow.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jamie Jaramillo. I work with Consensus Planning. My firm is a private sector planning and landscape architecture firm working with local developers in the Albuquerque metro area, and as Joanna mentioned, communities all around the state. We've worked with several communities in New Mexico to establish and update metropolitan redevelopment plans, and recently we worked to apply for a metropolitan redevelopment bond, which I'll be talking about today. I think I lost the controls again, Joanna. Oh, there they are. Okay. All right, so today I'll be discussing this financing tool, Metropolitan Redevelopment Bonds, specifically available to private development and redevelopment projects within a metropolitan redevelopment area. It is called a Metropolitan Redevelopment Bond, and it's a bond that's very similar to IRBs, and Joanna just described, with a shorter term limit, about 7 years on a Metropolitan Redevelopment Bond, and it's primarily used, as we've seen today, for the tax abatement benefit on the property, which the project is proposed. And as Joanna mentioned, benefits, which this has a huge benefit to communities and municipalities, as it has, the municipality itself has no obligation. The obligation is all on the company itself to repay the principal of that bond if they choose to use it that way. So a project that applies for an MR bond is similar to a student who applies for a scholarship offered only to students in a specific zip code. There is still an application process for all students to apply for the scholarship, but the scholarship is only available to students in that geographic area. Likewise, the only projects that can apply for MR bonds are those within a designated metropolitan redevelopment area. There is a planning process associated with becoming an MR area, which I'm sure some of the communities that are attending the webinar are familiar with. And there is also available grant funding for that planning process. But there are benefits of having this type of plan in place for development and redevelopment projects, including potential MR bonds. If you are a private property owner and located within an MR area, you can apply for this type of funding through your local government. And if you are the local government, you may accept applications for such a bond, and the community has no obligation on the bond. Because the details are a little on the boring side, I'd like to focus on my presentation on the experience that I had in applying for an MR bond with a team working on a redevelopment project in downtown Albuquerque. My role on the project was a liaison between the development team and the city's planning department staff in preparation of the application and the project plan. I presented the project to the Albuquerque Development Commission last month with our team, which included the development group, FBT architects, and a bond attorney with Rode Law Firm. We received a unanimous recommendation for approval, and our next step is to present the project to the City Council and request that the bond be approved, which will be later this year. The project itself is an innovative mixed-use project that includes both redevelopment improvements to existing structures on the site, but it also includes a new development in the place of an existing surface parking lot, which you see the very nice rendering of the new development that is proposed on the corner of 3rd and Lomas. So the site itself is located in the City of Albuquerque's downtown 2025 Metropolitan Redevelopment Area and Sector Plan area. And it currently includes the site itself, as you can see from the aerial, a surface level parking lot here on the corner of Lomas and 3rd Street, 2 office buildings, a restaurant, and a parking structure, all located between Lomas Boulevard, Roma Avenue, and 3rd and 4th Street. The project includes a new mixed-use building that will develop with ground floor retail and restaurant space, a new Class A office space, and 174 residential market rate units with amenities. Once completed, the project is anticipated to generate approximately 250 jobs, not including construction jobs, and brings additional residents, density, and activity to the downtown core. I wanted to talk just a little bit about the process. It definitely was not a linear path, but these are the general and larger milestones that we accomplished or will accomplish. We attended a pre-application meeting with the city's Metropolitan Redevelopment Agency. We built a very strong team, which included the development entity, consensus planning, FBT architects, and, as I mentioned, Rode Law Firm. We prepared and submitted a project plan and the required application materials. We made the presentation to the Albuquerque Development Commission, as I mentioned, and then we will go on to City Council. The last thing I'd like to touch on today is to provide a few tips to anyone who's considering applying for an MR bond. Make sure to discuss your ideas and potential application with the planning staff early on. They're very helpful, and they've been through this before, so they know what you might expect through the process. Have a solid project plan and team. I was very lucky to work on the team that had not necessarily taken a project like this through, but has worked on development for over 30 years, and I was very lucky to have the backing from my team. Make sure to check all the application boxes before applying, including having the zoning entitlements. It was a very big point to the Development Commission that we were already entitled for the project, and we weren't just asking for this bond without any other implications on the project. And last, use the MR plan as a guide related to policy. And as Joanna mentioned earlier, you have to demonstrate that there is a public benefit. And using the MR plan and its policy will help you to do that. Also, it helps with the type of redevelopment project that you propose, knowing that it's applicable in the area, and as a resource for any other project aspects. And now I'll turn it back to NMEDD, and I'll take questions after the presentation. Thanks, Joanna.
Thanks, Jamie. That was really interesting.
Could I chime in just real quick on a little bit, because there's a couple points that I wanted to underscore. So Jamie mentioned the Metropolitan Redevelopment Plan. Funding is available through the New Mexico Finance Authority for such plans. They initiate through our office, through our regional representatives, and you can find a map on our website as to who your regional representative is. So if you're interested in doing a Metropolitan Redevelopment Plan, again, there are funding up to $50,000 available through the New Mexico Finance Authority, and that would be initiated through our regional representatives. The other thing I wanted to mention that Jamie brought up IRB terms, and I just wanted to make sure that it was clear. So she mentioned that the MRA bonds or the MR bonds are limited to 7 years. So IRB terms are consistent with the type of property that's being abated, and it's tied to the depreciation and amortization schedule. So that just means that you can have an IRB term for the life of the real equipment. If you're depreciating it in 7 years, then it's a 7-year term, 14 years term, etc. And for real property, for real estate, then it would be the amortized life of that project. So it could be a 30-year real estate IRB with a 14 or 7-year equipment component, and that's kind of, again, tied to the abatement of the property that you are trying to achieve. And again, I can get into more detail individually on that. It's a little technical point, but you can have multiple years within an IRB for different parts of it, the real estate and the equipment. So anyway, those two things are what I just wanted to underscore.
Great, thanks, Juan. So the next funding concept that we wanted to talk about is the tax increment finance. This is similar in concept to a bond in the way that this is a financing tool that a community can use to help offset costs, to help business development and create economic impact in a specific area. So the TIFs are interesting in the way that if you do have a development project or infrastructure needs, or you have blighted areas in a specific location, this can be a unique way that a community can engage financing opportunities. So the idea behind it is that this is a mechanism to capture the future tax benefits of real estate improvements to pay the present cost of those improvements. So if you are talking about a downtown area that does have considerable blight and abandoned buildings, what you can do is essentially define that geographic location. And how you do that is then you freeze the property tax revenue up to a base year assessment at a base year. And in future years, all the tax revenue up to the base year assessment continues to go to the taxing jurisdiction. So the idea is that the improvements that are made to that geographic location will increase the property tax. So that additional tax will be able to go back to the taxing jurisdiction. So it's an interesting way to fund needs and development needs within the specific geographic location. And the interesting thing is that obviously you have to have the support of the local government, you have to have the support of the businesses and residents within that area. You have to receive a vote, and then it goes through the Board of Finance as well. And we actually, our Economic Development Department, we have housed within our department the Main Street organization, which is a fantastic organization that works with smaller communities, and they get involved with TIFs quite a bit. So if you do have follow-up questions on TIFs, they're a great organization to reach out to. The next idea is, we're going through these very quickly, but the next idea is a special improvement district, and this is a very broad term that actually fits under tax increment financing as well. And SIDs, special improvement districts, are actually a big umbrella that encompass and cover quite a bit of different items, like business improvement districts. You also have public investment districts, special tax districts, single purpose districts. So you also have special assessment districts. So you have all of these different acronyms: SIDs, BIDs, PIDs, TIDs. These are all under the idea that's very similar to tax increment financing, that you are defining a specific geographic location which you've identified that would benefit from additional business services, it would benefit from additional revenue, it would benefit from basically putting extra attention to it. And so the idea is that once you have defined your area that you want to focus on, you have to get the approval from, as a TIF, from the residents and the business owners within the district, and then they have to vote to approve it. And once that approval is made, and it can be kind of a complex, one of the disadvantages, it can be kind of a complex process, but once it is approved, then that organization can become a nonprofit. Sometimes they operate as a public partnership, but they have the ability to manage that that particular area. So a lot of times you will see business improvement districts where they are offering business services, they are offering marketing and promotion for that area, and then they're also able to raise funding for particular financing needs in that area. So you can add extra security to the area. You can add, I've seen certain areas that add more sanitary actions in the area. So anything that the BID or the SID identifies that is needed to supplement the public services that are already in existence. So anything else to add on SIDs? Okay. So like I said, we're moving pretty quickly, but Juan, if you want to go ahead and talk about the Board of Finance's role in all of these tools that we've been talking about.
Yes. So, yes, the Board of Finance is ultimately responsible for approving all of the different special districts. They manage the process. It's a really involved, as Joanna mentioned, you have to create an entity within the district to determine the expenditures and to make decisions. All that stuff's got to be done in advance. As Jamie was talking about the MR bond, there was all of that, all of the work that went into designating those areas previously. They set up all these organizations. They were approved by the Board of Finance, et cetera. So we are more than happy to get you in contact with that group, but they are the ultimate deciders of TID activity, TIF activities. And so, you know, they have a statutory requirement. They make the size of, they determine based on our tax situation. So anyway, I just wanted to underscore that all of this happens under the Board of Finance, and they will be the ones to make ultimate decisions about TIDs, bids, and SIDs with respect to communities that want to start those. And the process is very involved, but again, if somebody's specifically interested in something, we can talk offline about how to get that. Usually, again, it is setting up an organization, setting up for a vote, passing an ordinance, and then establishing the district, and then kind of getting that funded from the taxing authorities, and then expending those funds for the activities that are agreed upon. So that's pretty much what I wanted to.
Okay, great. And then the final topic that we were going to attempt to cover was New Markets tax credit, which we could easily take 4 hours to talk about, but a few minutes.
Right, and for anybody that's heard the very detailed presentations of John Brooks at the New Mexico Finance Authority, this is not going to be that. So this is really probably you could let us know how well we do, but this is the shortest presentation for New Markets I have ever done, which is 2 slides. But anyway, the New Markets tax credits were created during the Clinton administration as a way to address blighted areas and encourage investments in those communities. It's become a very popular tax credit. The targeted census tracts are low-income areas, generally defined as poverty rates of 20% or higher, and you know, LMI at around 80% for the state and the region. Basically, a developer will make an application to the community development entity, and this, in our case, our community development entity is Finance New Mexico, which is a for-profit sub-entity of the New Mexico Finance Authority, and they are statutorily designated as our official community development entity, and they receive the tax credits directly from the federal government. At the heart of it, it's a federal tax credit against federal tax liability. So that would be high net worth individuals. It would be any corporations with a lot of tax liability, and as they get closer to a tax bracket, they want to lower that liability, and so they are able to purchase these credits on the open market. The credit is basically a 39% or 39 cents per dollar allocation for the project. These credits are taken by the investors over 7 years, starting with the first year, 5% over the first 3 years, and then 6% each following year. Next slide, please. So just to kind of put it into context, a $10 million, and this is very, very high level, so don't hold me to the specifics of these, but a $10 million New Markets tax credit project. So I've got a project and it's $10 million. And I determine that my project is in a qualified census tract. And you can determine that by going to the New Mexico Finance Authority. There's a property search tool where you can punch in an address, and it will tell you if that address is in a qualified census tract. So I'm a developer. I've got a $10 million project. I determined that my project is in a qualified census tract, and I applied to the New Mexico Finance Authority under Finance New Mexico for a $10 million project allocation. Let's assume that I do that and that I'm approved by the board. And so they said, yes, we will allocate those credits to your project. And then they inform the market that there are buyers for tax credits that the Finance Authority holds. And then the investor goes and determines what they will pay for those credits. The determination is based on the individual internal rate of return for the investor and the present value of money. So maybe we'll have a webinar just on how to price New Markets tax credits in the future. But in any event, it's a mathematical formula for whatever the investor needs on an internal basis and the present value of money spread out over 7 years. So that's generally between 70 and 90 cents. In the last few years, I've seen them in roughly landing in the 85 cents to the dollar range. So the proceeds, so the investor goes, I'll buy that credit. I pay as an investor $2.7 million for essentially $3.9 million worth of credits that are spread out over 7 years. And those cash proceeds are injected into the project, and they're held by the CDE, or the community development entity. So the CDE charges fees to cover its costs and administrative overhead. Those fees can be anywhere from 3 to 5%. So in our example here, let's say that they charge 5% of $10 million. That's the project cost. That's $500,000. So therefore, we subtract that $500,000 from the proceeds of the sale of the credit, and that leaves a balance of $2.2 million in cash for the project. So we started the project at $10 million. We subtract the added cash from the sale of the credit minus the fees, and what we have is a balance of $7.8 million. So the $10 million project now only has to get $7.8 million of financing, and that financing could take a number of different forms. It could be a bank loan, it could be a combination of a grant, it could be a number of different things, but basically, if you want to look at this example, if it's a loan, if it's a commercial loan, then the commercial loan has been subsidized by about 19%, or a different way to look at it is 19% of equity has been injected into this project. At the end of the 7 years, the funds are utilized. It's important to note that if it is a commercial loan, that there is no disbursement of cash before the end of the 7-year period. That's a big no-no. It's called a kind of an event. It triggers the number of different things. So what ends up happening is that when I mentioned it's a 7-year project, part of what goes into that $500,000 fee is the creation of a series of entities in a closed loop system. And so they create, for federal tax purposes, a single purpose entity for that project. And so no funds could be dispersed before the 7-year period, but if it's a loan, you can have within that entity the accumulation of interest payments as well as principal payments. But you just can't pay the payments before the 7 years. And so all of that gets locked up tight. And once the project is completed in 7 years, it is unwound, as they say, and all the entities are dissolved. And whatever equity remains at the end of that project is normally forgiven or invested in the project, however you want to classify it. So that 19% equity, potentially the project gets to keep that. So what it ultimately means is you have a $10 million project, it only costs you $7.8 million, and you get to keep the rest of the funds, which is a pretty neat way of doing a project. So that's the 10,000-foot view. We have about, I'd say, about $25 to $30 million of unobligated credit at this moment. The credits are split between rural and urban areas. And like I said, you can easily check that with an online mapping tool. Just a real quick piece of information, kind of breaking news right now for everybody on this webinar, is that the most recent federal tax law that was passed included something called opportunity zones. And these opportunity zones are basically piggybacking on qualified census tracts associated with the new markets tax credit. So our team will be working with the Secretary to make a series of recommendations to the Governor. The Governor will be able to designate up to 25% of qualified census tracts as these opportunity zones, and that will trigger certain other federal funds as well as some tax benefits. So stay tuned over the next several weeks. We'll be developing that, and we'll probably put a webinar together to tell everybody about the designated areas. The Governor has the discretion to make that determination. We will make a series of recommendations along with our stakeholder partners and reaching out to other communities. But basically, we'll be doing that. So those opportunity zones will match new markets tax credit qualified census tracts. And again, stay tuned for more information on that. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Joanna.
Great, thanks, Juan. So that sums up our whirlwind discussion of these different financing tools. So if you do have questions, feel free to type them in to the question box, and feel free to cover any of the topics that we addressed. We do have a few questions, so I'll go ahead and read that to the panel. And if you want to chime in, go ahead and do so. So one of the first questions is, how are SIDs funded? Does anyone want to take that one?
So, I mean, what Joanna was saying basically is that the funding is the difference between what the base, so if you define a special improvement district and then you define the components of that district, or who are the entities that will benefit from that, you take the existing tax base and you project what there's going to be, what increase will happen in 7 or 10 years, and you agree to utilize that difference to fund the improvements now. So either happens through a bond or through a loan, but the monies are going to be, dedicated to paying back construction improvements over that period. So let's use an example. Let's say that you have a special improvement district. We're here in Santa Fe, so let's talk about St. Michael's. Let's say we designate St. Michael's Drive as a special improvement district, and let's say that we determine that it's going to cost $10 million to improve the sewers there. And we create an organization, and it's passed by the State Board of Finance. They approve it. We have a public vote. Everybody agrees. The different members of that improvement district have to agree, I believe, as well. So the individual businesses have an opportunity within St. Michael's to either chime in or to try to exclude themselves. In any event, based on that feedback, a district is drawn up. An organization is created to manage the funds and to determine how those funds will be spent. Either a bond is floated or funds are raised in the private sector, and the dedication of the repayment of those funds is based on the projected increase in tax revenue over that period of time, above and beyond the baseline that's established. So that's how you finance, that's how they finance that improvement. So if we make the determination that over that 7-year period, there'll be a $15 million increase over that period above and beyond the baseline, we'll have access to $10 million for those improvements, and that will provide a good buffer for the repayment as well. Obviously, there's a little bit of a risk factor in that if the tax base doesn't increase accordingly, then there's going to be a shortfall. But generally speaking, one can make those determinations pretty accurately in advance to determine what the future tax base is going to be over that time. And that's part of what that organization does that's set up to manage the funds, is to make sure that the tax revenue collected is enough to cover the debt service on the bond or the loan. A good place to look for that kind of information, or a good example of that, I should say, is the Spaceport has a tax increment district down there to support, or the area, I should say, the counties around the Spaceport to support roads and other infrastructure for the Spaceport. And so there's a reserve, and there are funds, and that fund builds up. And so you could look at that as an example. Hopefully that answers that question.
Thanks, Juan. The next question is, can you provide the web address for checking addresses for determining qualified low-income eligibility? So we will send out that website that Juan mentioned was on the NMFA's website. We'll send that out along with the presentation and the YouTube link. We did get a question that said that the participant had questions about some of the programs that Crystal mentioned. So if you do have questions about any of those programs, simply feel free to contact us. And we do have our contact here at the end of the slides, as well as NMFA's website, DFA's Board of Finance, and then our Main Street website too. And before we close, I wanted to go over some upcoming events that we have that we're excited about. So Crystal mentioned the Rural Efficient Business Program. This is a business program that is targeted toward helping businesses and agricultural producers reduce their energy costs and essentially become more efficient. We are working with MNERD to provide energy assessments free of charge to businesses and address where they can save money. And then we're also addressing financial efficiencies too. So we're hosting a workshop. This will be our second workshop. We're doing that in Las Vegas at Charlie's Spick and Span. It's free. You just need to register at the link provided. And we will be having 4 more workshops across the state. So stay tuned to those to see if there are any in your area. And then FUNDIT's meeting is coming up March 6th. And that will be in Albuquerque at the Mid-Region Council of Governments. And I did provide the link if you are interested in applying for consideration into that FUNDIT meeting. Feel free to apply. And the cutoff for applications is February 16th. And then our next webinar that we're having that's hosted by the finance team will be going more into detail about the credit enhancement program that was mentioned earlier. So this is the program that we are able to fulfill shortfalls in collateral with business loans. And we are targeting underserved markets, which we are defining as rural areas. We're defining as minority business owners, women business owners, and veteran business owners. So tune into that webinar. You can register there and get more information about that. So with that, if no one has any more questions, we'll go ahead and sign off. But I want to thank everybody for attending and thank the panelists for doing a good job at discussing these topics in a short amount of time. And as Juan mentioned, please feel free to reach out to us to follow up, get more information. Let us help connect you to the experts in the state on all of these different issues. That's what we're here for. So feel free to reach out to any of us, as well as Jamie at Consensus Planning. They do a great job. All right, thanks very much, and hope to see you on the next webinar, or next event.
Thanks, Joanna.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you very much, and a great job. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.